Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. As you know, at Mind Our Work, our mission is to improve workplace well-being by simplifying the process of finding vendors, learning strategies, and hearing from others who've done it before. Working from home has been normal over the past year for many. However, if you're like me, setting up my work environment could always be better. As a result, I've asked Sarah Snable, co-founder of Pro Ergonomics, to help us better understand the nuances of workplace ergonomics and how to optimize our workspace in order to improve our well-being and reduce the risk of debilitating injuries such as musculoskeletal disorder. Sarah is a certified professional ergonomist and registered kinesiologist practicing in the field of ergonomics for over 14 years. She brings a wealth of experience conducting ergonomic assessments and training sessions for clients in the public and private sectors. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let me get started here. So talking about workplace ergonomics, and working from home, it's normal for a lot of us over the past year, but still taking some adjusting. The reality is that it's sort of a disruption, right? The last year is a bit of a disruption in terms of what we know or what we have known in terms of the workplace. Some people maybe worked from home prior to, this stay-at-home orders, this work from home, this pandemic. But not a lot of people. And I think for the most part, a lot of people were only working from home just, here and there, right? A day or two here and there. Definitely not under the same conditions that we're in right now. We've got added distractions at home. Maybe we don't have all of the same equipment that we had when we were working at our office. And so my goal for today is pretty specific, actually, right? Knowing that working from home is not easy, I want to be able to help provide you with some awareness and some education for working from home. If you are, if you're the one working from home, if you are supporting staff working from home, just talking about some of the ergonomic implications and then those best practices for managing them. And really, that's my outline for today. I want to talk about some of those challenges. How is it impacting your business? And then what are some tips and strategies that we can go through to, take the next steps, ultimately get ourselves, the goal really is to get ourselves more comfortable. If you're not familiar with ergonomics in terms of, how I might define it, I will give you the very short and sweet definition here. Ergonomics is about fitting the work to the worker. It does not matter what industry I am talking about when it comes to computer workstation ergonomics or office ergonomics here. It's about fitting the stuff, right? The computer, the equipment, the tools, all of your physical things to you, the worker, to your body. So you shouldn't have to, again, we're talking about a computer, you shouldn't have to adopt an awkward posture, right? You shouldn't be hunched over your laptop or looking down or twisting or working in some sort of pretzel formation to work at your computer. You shouldn't have to put your body in that strain or that stressful type of posture. Ideally, we are moving all of that stuff, all of that physical equipment so that you can sit relaxed and comfortable, right? Relaxed and comfortable is the goal to injury-free. And the types of injuries we're talking about here are, like you said, that mouthful of a word, musculoskeletal disorders, or you know what, I'll keep it short, MSDs. That's the term that Ontario uses in particular, right, with the WSIB and the Ministry of Labor. So MSDs is the goal, the type of injuries that ergonomics is trying to prevent. I don't want people to get those chronic strains and sprains. And the reality is when you're working at a computer, you're at risk of those, especially related to the upper body, right? The back, the neck, the wrists, sitting for a long period of time, especially if you are not fitting the work to the worker, right? If you are adopting a not so great posture, puts you at risk of those strains and sprains. It's like a cumulative type of injury, right? It'll build up over time. They are the most prevalent type of injury in Canadian workplaces, whether you knew that or not, but you can look at stats from, I just pulled the most recent published stats actually from the WSIB, they're from 2019, and strains and sprains, these musculoskeletal disorders actually account for more than 48% of all workplace injuries. It's crazy, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily think that it's that high, but It's the reason why ergonomics, you can be successful in the career of ergonomics as well, is that I'm helping to prevent these types of injuries. Okay, so that risk comes from, not having the greatest setup potentially, right? It could be your physical setup. You pair that, again, putting that strain on the soft tissues of your body, you pair that with some of the anxiety or stress that's going on right now. And this can be, for everybody, this is going to look a little bit differently, right? There's just the general stress and uncertainty of what's going on during the pandemic. There is the stress of what could be going on in your actual workplace. There could be the stress of what's going on in your home. So if you are working from home, but you have your partner working from home and your kids are home from school, and like added distractions while still trying to, output max productivity, that we carry our stress in our muscles too. So you get not so great setup, you get stress in the workplace or your home life, just in general. You have a recipe for injury, right? Or the musculoskeletal disorder, MSD. I should take my own tip and shorten it, right? What we're finding as well is that a lot of organizations maybe had a decent setup at work, right? Maybe you had your employees set up with a chair and a keyboard tray or adjustable monitor, adjustable equipment. But when we go home, what do we send them home with, right? The reality is that we sent a lot of people home with a laptop, and that was about it, right? We were really sort of not necessarily prepared for a whole, how do we support our employees at home in the full ergonomic capacity. What that means, though, is that we're at an increased risk as well, right? What started out as maybe just short-term temporary has now increased. We are pushing the year mark of this work from home normal. I mean, what we were calling as temporary, it's now been almost a year. So can we still define that as temporary? And what we know, originally it was what we sort of suspected, but what we now know is that staff, employees, they're sitting at dining room tables. That's their workstation at home, or the couch, or in bed, or whatever kind of table they can find. A lot of them are using a laptop exclusively, so no extra equipment. They may not have options for other places to set up their workstation, or other equipment to grab, right? Alternate chair options, for example. They're facing challenges when it comes to productivity and distractions. So again, this is definitely what we know. We have, as much as we already had a lot of workplace strains and sprains happening, the injury stats are not out yet for 2020, and I'll be intrigued to see how the year of 2020 actually plays into those injury stats. But I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of information about the cost, because some people are like, well, yeah, we sent all of our employees home, but like we can't afford to give everybody a full office setup at home. Totally, I get that. I hear that a lot. And that's not necessarily what I'm suggesting either, but I wanted to kind of put some dollar figures into this. This is a small case study, not necessarily COVID related, but the concept is the same here, is that this is a smaller workplace. We had about 22 workers in this company. When polled with a survey, about 18 of them reported some form of discomfort. If we look at the chart there, about 22%, the dark gray area, were related to the wrist. That works out to about 4 of their workers. And then the red and the light gray is actually upper back, neck, and lower back. So I mean, we can kind of group that all into back. And that's about 52%, I think, of their workers, which is about 9 workers that were reporting some sort of back injury. So this particular company, what they did was they decided that, wow, that's a lot of people that are reporting discomfort. We do not want that to turn into an injury. And they were willing to put forth an investment. About $17,000 is what they ended up getting the final kind of price tag on it. And they spent about $11,500 on equipment. So that's things like chairs or desks or keyboard trays or monitors, or the stuff to help make their computer workstations better fit their workers. And they also spent about $5,500 on ergonomic services. So the services there were the consulting, right? Having us come in and do the interviewing with the staff, figuring out what they need, writing recommendations, helping them select the equipment that was the right fit. And so the grand total about $17,000, which for some people, maybe you're like, oh, that's no big deal, or oh, that's really expensive, or wow, we have way more than 22 workers. But let's put that in the grand scheme of things here. What do injuries cost? Good question. Now, if you have some stats, if you have had a workplace injury, I would suggest that you maybe look up some of those, some of your actual numbers just to compare. But I've provided some information here, just like the average cost of a carpal tunnel syndrome, which is a wrist injury, is about $12,000. That's pulled from Alberta. The average cost of a back injury, again, more complex injury, usually off work for a little bit longer. The price tag's a little higher, $33,000 to $52,000. So that being said, if we flip back and just take a peek, right, their total intervention cost was $17,000. They did have about 18 workers reporting discomfort, but if we prevented one injury, only one injury, we have saved, right? Your return on investment is made up. You've made back your money by just preventing one back injury. And the reality is that we had, 9 people reporting discomfort. Not to say that all of them would have gotten to the state of like a lost time claim injury, but the risk was there, the potential was there. And these dollar figures are just direct costs. You can look at indirect costs too, which, to be honest, the direct costs are just the dollar amount. The indirect costs are the stuff that they're the stuff, the things, they're not tangible, but it's the things that have the bigger impact, I think, personally, right? And that's things like some of the things you can't really measure as easily. The lost productivity, the quality of work, people aren't focusing, so they're not outputting as much. Just employee engagement, right? Feeling like your employer doesn't necessarily care to provide the equipment, all of those things that kind of go into that workplace engagement. There's the presenteeism or absenteeism, depending on how you like to spin it, having people off work, the time, the resources that it takes to cover for that employee who's off. Maybe you have to retrain somebody to do their job. There's just so many other things that factor into an injury that we don't necessarily look at on the grand scheme. We're always looking at that dollar amount. Indirect costs can actually be more like 7 times the direct cost. So as much as we're reporting, $33,000 for a back injury, times that by 7, we're looking at, more like 200,000, right? Like the numbers go up quite a bit. So, not to say that we necessarily need to go out and buy a full new desk, but I mean, if I go back to those numbers, $17,000 for 22 workers, it's less than $1,000 per person. And again, if you're smart about how you're going and purchasing that equipment or, providing the equipment, you're getting people the stuff that they need as opposed to just, buying a whole shopping cart full of things that are just going to collect dust, right? We are very specific in purchasing the equipment, again, being very mindful on what we're going to purchase to make sure that it's going to fit our workers. And so those, again, are sort of the challenges, right? It's like the equipment, right? So what are we going to provide our employees and how are we going to provide it? So it just kind of comes down to like your policy a little bit. It can, right? As an organization, what are you going to be offering your staff in terms of equipment? Who's responsible to get it, right? The actual having the equipment to achieve the right setup is one element. The next element is giving staff the education or the tools, the know-how on how to use that equipment, or even how to use what they've got. Even if we haven't bought new stuff, how are they going to use that equipment to get them into a good ergonomic setup? And then pairing that together to increase or maintain, mostly we should say maintain productivity, right? Because that's the goal, is that we just want to try to prevent loss, really. Right, so those are some challenges, and I want to, this is where I will inflect some of my ergonomics knowledge on you, is just, the reality is that a lot of people are working on laptops, right? A lot, like, we can kind of do a little hands up here. How many of you are working on a laptop, and how many of you have plugged in extra accessories, right? But a laptop, this picture here is probably what most people look on a laptop. And I want to kind of go back and remind you about that definition of ergonomics, fitting the work to the worker. In this particular picture, she has not fit the work to herself. Although it looks like she has a nice chair, right? You can tell it's got a nice backrest. She's leaning forward. She's craning in to see that laptop. And this is not uncommon for us to see with people working on laptops. But she's totally adopted a not so great posture to work with that equipment, as opposed to making some changes to that equipment, right? It's really hard on your neck, your shoulders, your wrists, your back, right? Upper body. And I will tell you, we do have the CSA ergonomic standard for office ergonomics, right? That gives us some guidelines. But working on a laptop, as is, with plugging in no extra accessories, it is impossible. Mark my words, impossible to achieve a proper ergonomic setup. You have to plug in something else to get it. You cannot, like, the proper posture is sitting upright, relaxed, shoulders relaxed, elbows bent to 90 degrees, looking straight ahead at your monitor. You can't get that with a laptop because it's all attached. It's all one piece. So here's a little activity for you guys watching. What I want you to do is sort of play along, and I want you to check your own setup, because this is this is probably the cornerstone piece of, ergonomics in any kind of a setup, but for computer ergonomics, you want your keyboard and mouse at elbow height, okay? So I've got a little video here I'm going to play. Okay, and I'll just keep replaying this over and over while I'm chit-chatting here, but I want you to play along here. So sit back in your chair. I want you to relax your shoulders. I want you to bend your elbows to 90 degrees. So kind of forget about where your keyboard and mouse actually are right now, and tell me where your hands hit. So in this particular case, when she raises her hands so that her forearms are parallel to the ground, you can see her hands are coming below the desk, right? So where are your hands hitting? Because that kind of defines what we're going to do for a setup. You want them to be in line with the desk, but I don't want you to modify your body. So you got to do that quick check. Just see where your hands hit, okay? So if your hands came below the desk, like in that video, what it means is that your desk height or your table height or your work surface height, because I realize that not everybody, you don't have to be working from a formal desk in order to achieve a good setup, but we're just talking about that working height. What it means is that it's too high. And if your hands were coming above that work surface, and it means that your working height was too low. And both of these have problems. I think that for the most part, most people will find that their working height is too high, right? For most people, their hands will come below the desk. And the biggest thing here is that we're seeing awkward wrist postures. And that's kind of the first thing. You're sitting upright, it's too high, you get a bend in your wrist. You can think of your wrist like a garden hose. That's probably one of the better analogies that I've crossed in my career. But the wrist is small. When you put a bend in a garden hose, when the water is flowing, what happens? Right? The water stops flowing, and your wrist is very much like that. You put a bend in your wrist, what's going to happen to the blood flow, the nerve signals, right? This is a small little joint. It doesn't like to be bent. And so that can, over time, the restriction in the blood flow, the nerve signals, and the movement really can cause inflammation, right? People often think about carpal tunnel. It could be tendonitis, it could be carpal tunnel. There's lots of things. But point being, the wrist doesn't like to be bent. And so as much as this might be the first posture that you see, your body's sort of natural way of accommodating to get a more straight wrist posture is that you'll sit up taller, right? And you can even, play along. If you see a bend in your wrist, you sit up taller, what happens? Well, your wrist goes straighter, but at the cost of back support, right? In order to sit up taller, you're no longer leaning against your backrest. And that gets tiring, right? That's tiring on your back over the course of a day, 7-hour workday times 5 days a week times weeks, months. That adds up. Your back, what's the point in sitting on a chair with a backrest then if you're not actually going to lean on it? The other thing we see sometimes too is that people might maintain the backrest height or the backrest support, but they'll push their keyboard further away from them and lean on the desk. Also not great just because we get the desk contacting our forearms, right, which can also impact blood flow. Similarly, when the work surface is too low, we get a bend in our wrist just in the other direction. And again, the natural tendency, the wrist doesn't your wrist, it will not maintain it there. You might think no, this is how I work. I lean against the backrest, it's all good. But watch your posture, especially if your work surface is too low. You'll probably find that you start slouching. Again, whether you're sitting or standing, your body's natural tendency is to round its shoulders forward and slouch into that, right? Both of those are just adding to the tension in your neck, your upper back. We have been hosting an at-home ergonomics webinar since March of 2020, when this whole pandemic first started, just trying to help educate people on working from home. And we have a poll in there. So we have now polled over 1,500 workers, and the statistics are sort of shocking, shocking, but expected, that 65% of people are not at the right height. Not at the right height at all, or 64%, too close to 65. So we asked them, are you too high? Are you too low? Or are you exactly at elbow height? And 64% of them are saying that they are not at the right height. So we know that there's some work to do, even when given the right equipment. People they need some guidance. They need some help, instruction on how to get there, how to get that ergonomic setup. Okay, so how are you going to fix that? Well, ideally, you want your keyboard and mouse to be in line with your elbow height. You want straight wrist. You want a 90-degree bend at your elbow. All of this is going to come when your shoulders are relaxed and your back is leaning against the backrest. And there are a couple of ways to get it, right? For a lot of people, I think the large majority of people, you're probably a little too low, right? Your hands are coming below the surface. That would be in line with what we're seeing. Something as simple, you could go out and buy a fancy new chair, but I would say that you don't need to do that right away. Try sitting on something to raise yourself up, right? If your chair has adjustability, great. Play around with some of the adjustment features on it. See if you can get a little bit higher. And if you don't have that, because maybe you are sitting on a dining room chair because that's your reality for your home office right now, sitting on a cushion can make all the world of difference. I know that for me in particular, I do work at the dining room table on occasion. It's not my preference. I do have an actual office at home because I do work from home most of the time, even pre-pandemic. However, pandemic meant that my kids were home, and from time to time, I needed to be, when I was on duty, I needed to be in the dining room watching them. But the dining room makes right here, these muscles, it makes it hurt working at the table. Sitting on a cushion though, and adding a little footrest to make sure that my feet aren't dangling means that I could sit there for 30 to 60 minutes, whatever that shorter time frame is that I needed, without discomfort, without these muscles screaming at me. So those are just some quick little adjustment tips that you might be able to make. For those of you who are finding that you were maybe too high, try propping your keyboard up a little bit, right? Things like boxes or those textbooks that were maybe sitting around collecting dust, something like that, a small tote bin even. All of those things can help to kind of get you to the right height. But the goal, again, honestly, I always say, if you remember nothing else, remember elbow height, right? It's all about getting your keyboard and mouse to your elbow height, right? And then you can kind of put it all together, without me kind of going into a ton of detail, but I do have a little video here to show you. Again, you're putting it all together. You want to be able to sit against your backrest. You want to have your keyboard and mouse at elbow height. Okay, you can't necessarily do that with your laptop, right? If we look at her right now, yes, her elbows are pretty darn close to elbow height, but she's looking down. And I did say we want it to be looking straight ahead at the monitor. It's obviously a challenge with a laptop. A simple solution here, and it's not going to break the bank by any means, is plugging in a keyboard and mouse, right? So let's watch how she can change her setup, right? So she can see that she's looking down at the monitor. She wants to be looking straight ahead. Roughly an arm's length is always a good guideline, right? She's got all those textbooks. Probably hasn't used those in years, but look at, they make the perfect monitor stand. She brings in her extra keyboard. That's at elbow height. She's now in line with her monitor. Honestly, this is a quick way, and this is a dining room table. This is a quick, easy way to make your dining room table way more functional and ergonomic when you're working at your computer. So it doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy a ton of equipment. Honestly, a keyboard and mouse would be the bare minimum that I would suggest to get you into a more ergonomic setup. If at present you only have a laptop, or maybe you've got one kicking around, but that would be some easy tips. And again, for you supporting your staff, right? If you're a manager supporting your staff, again, this doesn't have to be a super costly investment either. A keyboard and mouse is, with some education, is really kind of the bare minimum that you might need to get your staff a lot more comfortable than what they are currently. Right, so basic toolkit. Again, I would suggest maybe like evaluating if you have some sort of an office ergonomics program. I know that a lot of places have something, whether it's written down or not in a formal way is sort of the bigger difference, right? But at minimum, your employees working from home, whether it's temporary or permanent, I don't think in that case, I don't think it really matters, but a keyboard and mouse would be the bare minimum that I think should go along with a laptop to kind of make your work from home kit. Now, depending on how long working from home persists, like if you, there are some places that are, counting down the days until we get back into the office. And so working from home really is just this temporary measure. But I do know that I've been talking to a lot of places who are considering having people work from home more, right? Whether permanent is the right word or not, I'm not sure, but maybe more frequently, more opportunity to work from home. And if that's the case, it's an excellent opportunity to think about what you're going to provide your staff, but maybe think about it more from a program standpoint, right? So do we go out, what are we going to provide? Because you might want to consider a chair, you might want to consider laptop riser, or something other than having people prop their laptop up on books, which totally works. But again, if we're talking about safety of our laptop or what we're going to provide our employees, your telephone headset or earbuds, something like that too, for all of our virtual meetings that we've been doing. Your kit might want to include a few more things. Your program should also maybe consider some risk evaluation, right? So a lot of places, people who were at work, if they've had an ergonomic assessment in the past, or that they have pain or discomfort, they may be the employees that you want to spend a little bit more attention on up front or first, maybe a little bit more, money, resources on to make sure that they are set up so that we are not getting workplace injuries. Again, just because we're working from home doesn't mean we're not responsible for our employees, right? We absolutely still are, providing them with the equipment that they need to do their job. That does kind of fall under our responsibilities as a manager, as an employer, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that we do need to make sure that we're looking out for our staff. So, but just, again, being mindful that it doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be expensive, but ignoring it is also not okay, right? Just saying, well, it's okay, it's just temporary, right? We can only say that for so long. It worked for the first couple of weeks, but now that it's pushing a year, I think it's really important that we're at least looking at some basics. You pair the equipment with some education. And again, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a day's worth of training or anything like that, but your training for working from home, it can mimic what type of training you maybe were providing for in office, but should have some differences, some sort of nuances to attribute this working from home, right? Because realizing that when we provided education when everybody was working in the office, we were talking about maybe more of our cubicle setting. Everybody had a desk and they had the exact same computer, the exact same chair. When we are working from home, we don't know where people are working from. And we can't necessarily, part of your program, you start thinking about some of the challenges though, is that we can't necessarily say that we're going to provide everybody with a desk, because what if people don't have the space for that? So ultimately, your home office ergonomics training should talk about how to modify some equipment that you have at home, right? Focus on ways that they can move. Focus on ways that they can convert their kitchen table into something more ergonomic. Yeah, working on the couch isn't ideal, but if you've got to work on the couch for even a portion of your day, what can you do to make it more ergonomic, right? Make it relatable and informative for the staff, right? Based on current conditions. This is our reality right now. And maybe, I'm hesitant to say permanent versus temporary, but the reality is that it's been going on for a while. And a lot of people, I think, I don't know, some people like working from home, they like the opportunity. And so even if work from home continues, it's just giving them the tools and giving them education. It's like the two pieces of the puzzle that you need to have your best chance of success, right? Your best chance of productivity and coming together with with a solution, right, for your staff and what's going to work. And it's consistent too, right? Again, it all fits into your program. It allows you to have consistency, and how you're going to support all your employees. So something, that we've been doing is we've been doing these webinars. So again, it's 1-hour webinars that we've been hosting to staff, right? So employers are having us host these webinars. We talk a lot about temporary. That's kind of how it's been, a lot about temporary. In some cases, we are doing follow-up virtual assessments. So meeting one-on-one with employees who are maybe having a little bit more difficulty, not necessarily, I haven't anyways met with all staff, but usually kind of the ones that are maybe flagged as higher risk, right? Somebody who has higher need, and working with them one-on-one to come up with some solutions. And that's kind of what we've been doing. As work from home is persisting, we are currently in the process of developing a more permanent or a work from home education module that will address more of this permanent. So if you're going to have people working from home, or you're going to have remote work, whatever you're going to call it, we're in the process of working out developing this education module that is more than just a webinar. So right now, again, it's a webinar because that is accessible to most people. But going forward, if you're looking to incorporate something into a program, then having something that works with your learning management system is exactly what we've got in development. If you are looking for more information on any of that, again, the stuff that's upcoming, the stuff that we are doing right now, I would encourage you to check out our website, proergonomics.ca. And what you can do is you can download a work at home strategy. So right on the home page, there'll be a little pop-up. You can enter in your email and you will immediately get sent a copy of our work at home strategy, which includes sort of a summary of the stuff that I've talked about today, some tips on putting together a program, and then you'll also be kind of on our list for notification if you're interested in that learning module for working from home that's coming out. But I think in a nutshell, that sort of summarizes ergonomics, right? So you've got kind of your, we're trying to fit the work to the worker. We know that working from home is not easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. But I think what I know that we're seeing a lot of is that that I think a lot of people are just not necessarily addressing it because they're not really sure where to start. And again, it doesn't need to be complicated. It's just a matter of starting and starting to think about how you can support your employees. How can you even start with yourself, right? Do that quick check. Can you set your keyboard and your mouse up at the right height? Can you get your monitor to the right height? You're already going to be more ergonomic than you were before you even came to this session. And it gives you all the more reason to kind of help support your staff going forward.
Sarah, I don't know if you noticed, but I was actually pulling levers as you were talking, trying to adjust myself, because I noticed that there were several things that you were highlighting that I was not passing, I guess, your standard for, being in an ergonomic friendly workplace environment. So I'm like grabbing my keyboard. I was pulling levers on my chair. I was looking for my footrest, and I noticed that my footrest is probably not the ideal height. It was a bit of a disaster, I'll be honest. I'm glad I didn't fall off my chair while all this was happening.
It is, isn't it funny though, really, how it doesn't even have to be, you're like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And like those levers are there all of the time, right? Like it doesn't have to be, you think like it's simple, like, oh, I should know that, or, oh, I should check that. But sometimes it just takes that reminder, right? And again, it doesn't have to be like a 2-hour session. You could make it, a quick little 20, 30 minutes, quick, how to do your chair, right? And not everybody's going to have all the levers like you had. But I do think it's important. It's like a good challenge, right? If you have a chair that has levers on it, I challenge you to figure out what each of those levers does.
Yeah, and I especially liked how you were explaining sort of the elbow height to your table and making sure, because that was, as you were going through it, I'm like, oh yeah, like this just doesn't make sense. Like
what was your answer?
My elbows are there, they land below my table height. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm too low in my chair at this point. So I got to bring my chair up higher. So my elbows are actually 90 degrees.
Yes, because if your elbows are 90 degrees, it allows your shoulders to be relaxed, right? You don't want to have any tension. We're trying to prevent any kind of tension here. Just again, that's all the stuff that adds up over time. But you're right in the kind of common area, right? That most like a table, a desk, anything is kind of designed for this average person. They're usually about 29 or 30 inches, which is probably too high for most people. And
Right.
in a cubicle type setting, we would say, oh, just, put in a keyboard tray. Well, at home, we can't just say, oh, I'm going to install a keyboard tray on my dining room table. So you got to look for ways instead. So if you can't lower the keyboard and mouse down to you, how can you raise your body up? And so for you, you've got some levers on your chair. That's probably the first spot that you would check. And if you can't get to the right height, again, if somebody else is maybe sitting on a dining room chair, sitting on some cushions would be a good way. And
And
then
how
as
about,
you do those adjustments, if you do find that your feet are now not touching the floor, like again, in a cubicle setting, I would say get a footrest. We'd go to the Staples catalog. You can still do that at home, but for right now, you could probably grab a box. You could grab, again, a textbook. Boxes and textbooks have a million uses at home.
seriously, that's actually
I
very
mean, I
true.
have textbooks that are collecting dust and they have come in handy, right? I've used them to prop up my monitor. I've used them for propping up my laptop. I've come up with a couple of different settings because I think for me, the biggest thing was the increase in virtual meetings. So my setup was okay, but I usually keep my laptop closed, to be honest. I don't use my laptop much at all. I have a big monitor plugged in, but it doesn't have a webcam. So then I was starting to use my laptop more. So then textbooks and all of these things are coming out to get my webcam at the right height.
Right.
Because after the first few looking down with like kind of the double chin effect.
And what are your thoughts on this? Because standing desks have become very popular over, the last few years. What are your thoughts on that? And are they actually helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that there's a place for them. I think it's an interesting conversation. I think that there's some pros and cons to them. I think that in the actual workplace, there's a lot of jobs that maybe are beneficial to have them. I don't necessarily think that everybody needs them. I think that standing is great as an option. But if you had a job where you stood all day, the number one complaint is all I want to do is sit, right? And then we have these jobs that are sitting all day and all they want to do is stand. So there's some sort of a balance. I do find though that working from home, I think maybe it's because we don't have as many of these sort of natural opportunities to get up. I think there's something to be said about maybe an added benefit of being able to stand when you're working from home. Right in the workplace, maybe you got up to go to the water cooler, you got up to go meet with your colleagues for lunch, not to mention maybe actual work stuff, right? Like you would go down the hall to go to a meeting. You had the option that you could go and knock on your colleague's door if you had a question as opposed to calling them. Maybe you went to a shared printer. All of these things are movement. When we're at home, though, we're going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, which is sitting. And we're kind of tied there. And we're also not leaving our house a whole lot either. So even just for that added change in scenery, a standing workstation is good. And again, I'm all about trying to use what you can first. You could totally go out and buy a sit stand desk, right? The price tag is kind of high on those. And so what I would suggest is see if you like standing first by making a standing workstation right at home. Again, you can use your boxes. What would come in really handy actually is an ironing board. Again, if you have an ironing board that maybe is not getting a lot of use right now, an ironing board is it's sort of ergonomic. It's inherently ergonomic, right? Because often you can adjust them. So you could create a standing workstation, put your laptop on an ironing board for a short period of time.
That is brilliant. I actually never thought of that. And it's such a cheap alternative for you to just put your devices on
Yep.
and you can get started. That's amazing. One of the things that I thought about standing desks, because I considered getting one myself. I've worked with them in the past. I
Yep.
find that in addition to the sort of trying to fill in that gap of what your normal behavior would be in the workplace, it also anchors you into your desktop a lot more, right? Because now you have more of a reason to stay at your computer and not move as much. Whereas I think if you make the excuse of not getting that standing desk, you can actually force yourself in a way to start walking around and get away from your computer. So it's easier on your eyes, it's better on your body. Instead of just saying, hey, look, now I'm going to have another excuse to attend more Zoom meetings or to be on more calls or whatever they may be, just by pressing that button and my desk goes up, right?
Right. It's as if standing solves the problem, but it doesn't really, right? Like standing, sure, it allows the muscles to move, which is, what we're trying to do. But you're right, it's not necessarily giving us a reason to get away from our desk. It's sort of promoting us being able to stay there and just really do less interrupted work because but ultimately it still comes down to the person. It still comes down to our habits. The reality is that we are as humans, we're inherently lazy. Maybe lazy isn't the right word, but we take the easiest route, right? So if it takes effort, we're not likely to do it. So we still, even if you have the standing workstation, you still have to push that button and make yourself go between sitting and standing. And so for some people, that might be easier than it is to actually say, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to get away from my computer once every hour. Because if you're like really honed in on that report, you might not want to take a break right now because you don't want to lose your flow, for example. So again, there's always pros and cons to it, but I do absolutely agree that, I mean, I wouldn't go around and recommend a sitting to standing workstation for absolutely everybody. But at home, it's the perfect opportunity to try it because we're already we're creating our own workstations, right? So, I mean, and you might not get it perfect. Like, let's say you are going to use your ironing board or your kitchen counter, for example. Maybe your monitor doesn't get all the way up to your eye height, right? But if you're only working there temporarily, maybe that just helps for the time being. It gets you standing, gives you a change of scenery, and again, helps kind of shift your focus and get you almost like re-energized, right?
Right.
Happens to
One
me.
last,
You only work
one
in your
last
office for so long, right?
Yeah, exactly. The change of scenery is good, and you usually get it at, well, like you said, at work, right? Where you get to go to the water cooler, the coffee machine,
Mhm.
or you go outside for a walk to go to the cafe, whatever that might be. Whereas
Yeah.
now we're just kind of we're isolated in this, like, small environment, and I feel bad for those that even work in very small apartments, and don't really have a
Mhm.
lot of space. So like that's, obviously I'm sure a lot more challenging for them as well. But one
Absolutely.
last question before we pop off.
Yeah.
One thing you alluded to was around sort of catering to each individual's
Mhm.
necessities, right? So there's potentially a group of people that are quite possibly at higher risk of incurring an injury.
Mhm.
But additionally to that, there's also those that probably aren't even at a higher risk yet, but
Yeah.
for like essentially that behavior change component is probably a bit of a challenge, right? Is that something that you
Mhm.
also look at when you're working with companies? Is like, how do we now get folks to like really adopt some of these practices?
Yep, absolutely. There's a lot of people who, if they're not feeling pain or discomfort, they maybe followed along there, but why would they make a change if they're not actually feeling pain or discomfort? Um, and we absolutely always hear that. Like, but those changes they should be easy, right? So we try to do it in a way that makes it easy. But I think um, the basic toolkit is sort of a keyboard and mouse everybody is going to benefit from, right? Providing them some basic education on how to use it. You're checking off some of your boxes in those cases. You have some people who maybe have higher need or at higher risk, maybe because they are already reporting discomfort. Like, that's kind of how there's like your no discomfort, and then there's some discomfort, and then maybe there's people who've already had an injury claim in the past. There's sort of your three levels. And so the people who, those are the people who already had an injury claim in the past are probably the ones that you're addressing first, maybe doing more one-on-one assessments for, and then followed by people who are reporting discomfort. What can we do to kind of help them? But everybody will benefit from that kind of general education. And again, if you're kind of if you're working stuff into a program or a policy, then you are being consistent all the way through for everyone. There's no favoritism. There's no, um, I want what she's got just because she got that, as like that happens a lot. But again, you're kind of doing it based on need. You're giving them the basic toolkit. You're giving them, and then this is the same though as it's doing a risk assessment. It's basic, like a basic safety program, right? So it's awareness, risk assessment, implementation, and then follow up. Your plan, do, check, act. Right? It follows all of that, where you want to make sure that you are addressing. You need to know who's at risk and then addressing it. We have a lot about like self-assessment, right? And I think that kind of goes in nicely. You can do like a self-assessment checklist and get people to sort of check their own posture. Pictures. Pictures go a long way, which is why I like to include some of those videos. But pictures of yourself, if you're not sure if your posture is off, take a picture of yourself from the side, right? Set up your tripod, a selfie camera, your selfie timer, whatever it is, and take a picture of you working from the side and see, like, are you looking down? What kind of weird postures do you have going on? And I find that those are the things that kind of help to encourage people to maybe change their posture too, if they can kind of see how I can show you a picture of good and bad posture, but if people don't really relate to how they fall on that spectrum, then they might not be willing to make change either.
All right, that's super helpful. Sarah, Thank you so much for taking the time. There's so much information here. I'm probably going to now spend about 30 minutes trying to figure out how to sort my whole arrangement out, because I know that my monitor isn't at the right height, my chair, let's not, we're going to go down a rabbit hole if I start to like really point out all the things you highlighted for me here. So
Pick one
thank,
thing. Pick one thing
I
to
will
change
start. I will start with
in
I
the
think the
next
chair.
5 minutes, and that would be anybody listening. Pick one thing, change one thing.
That's a really good that's a really good starting point. So if you want to know more about what Sarah's doing, proergonomics.ca, reach out to Sarah and get more information. I'm sure she has a ton of resources on the website that everybody can benefit from, and obviously a lot of the programs that she's working on and spoke about in this presentation. Also, don't forget to visit mind.work.io for all the resources we have there, including the interview and the webinar here that we have today will also be on there as well. Additionally, other resources around improving mental health, wellness, and well-being in the workplace, which is the focus of what we're doing, and trying to bring you experts like Sarah to be able to help you move forward and get into that direction to make sure that your employees are taken care of, right? And that's what we're here to do, and making sure that everybody feels good about the work that they're doing and feels supported every single day. So thanks again, Sarah. Thank you for everybody watching, and I hope everybody's doing great.